My name is Sophie Bennett, I'm 29. And this is the story of how a box of yellowed paper destroyed the pedestal my grandmother had stood on for 50 years. In the Bennett family, history wasn't something you remembered, it was something you curated. We were a family of appearances, of keeping up, and of burying anything that didn't fit the narrative of success. I was the quiet one, the archivist who preferred the smell of old books to the noise of family cocktail parties. I spent my days preserving other people's histories in the city library, safe in the silence. But I never expected that the loudest silence in my life would come from my own bloodline. If you enjoy real-life stories about uncovering buried family secrets, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. When Clara died in her sleep at 84, the family didn't mourn her so much as they processed her. The funeral was efficient. My father, Robert, gave a stiff eulogy about finding peace, while grandmother Margaret sat in the front row, dry-eyed and elegant in black Chanel, accepting condolences for the burden she had carried all these years. The cottage was immaculate. The wood floors were polished to a warm honey glow. The furniture was old, but cared for. Every surface was covered in books, but they were stacked with precision. The air didn't smell like decay. It smelled like lavender and beeswax. It was quiet, peaceful, and deeply lonely. I spent the morning sorting through clothes that were decades out of fashion but neatly pressed. I packed up mismatched china. I felt a strange pang of guilt. I didn't know this woman. We had let Margaret tell us who Clara was, and we never bothered to check the source. By early afternoon, the rain had started, tapping a steady rhythm against the glass. There was a beautiful mahogany secretary desk against the wall, its roll-top locked. I found a small brass key in a teacup on the windowsill. The lock clicked open with a satisfying snap. I rolled the top back. Inside, it was organized chaos. Ledgers, receipts, and a stack of sketchbooks filled with incredible charcoal drawings. I didn't know she was an artist. And then, I saw the box. It was a simple wooden cigar box, tucked into the very back of the deepest pigeonhole. It wasn't dusty like the others. It looked handled, worn smooth by touch. I pulled it out and opened the lid. Inside were bundles of letters. Dozens of them. They were tied with blue ribbon, the paper thin and brittle with age. But it wasn't the quantity that made my breath catch. It was the handwriting. Sharp, slanted, and distinctive. Clara's handwriting, and on the front of every single envelope, written in fading ink, was the same name. Margaret. They were all addressed to my grandmother. But none of them had stamps. None of them had been mailed. I picked up the bundle on top. The date on the first envelope was June 14, 1968. I sat down in Clara's leather chair. This was the rambling of a confused woman, but something in the room felt heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to listen. I slid the first letter out of the envelope. My dear sister, it began, you win. I have signed the papers. I have given up the rights to the inheritance, just as you asked. Not because I believe you are right, but because you promised that if I did this, you would let me see him. You promised that if I gave you the money, you would stop telling people I was sick. Please, Margaret. I have kept my end of the bargain. Let me see my son. I stopped reading. The world seemed to tilt sideways. My son, Aunt Clara, didn't have children. That was part of the legend. She was the barren spinster. The lonely woman who never married. I looked at the date again. 1968. I did the math in my head. My father was born in 1968.
I sat in that leather chair until the light outside turned gray and the rain blurred the windows into abstract paintings. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the paper. My son. I read the line again and again. It had to be a metaphor. Maybe she meant a pet, a godson? But as I reached into the box and pulled out the next letter, the denial in my chest began to splinter. The next envelope was dated August 20th, 1970. Margaret, I saw him today at the park. You were pushing him on the swings. He looks so much like our father. He has that little cowlick in his hair. I wanted to come over. I wanted to touch his hand. But you saw me standing by the fence and you pulled him away. You looked at me like I was a monster. You told me if I signed the papers, I could be his Auntie Clara. You said I could be part of his life. Why are you doing this? Why are you erasing me? He is my Bobby. He is mine, Bobby. My father's name was Robert. But in all the old home movies, the ones grandmother Margaret narrated with such pride, she always called him Bobby. I felt like I was going to throw up. The silence of the cottage, which had felt peaceful an hour ago, now felt suffocating. It was filled with the ghosts of a woman screaming into a void, writing letters she knew she would never send because she had no one to send them to. I kept reading. It was a timeline of a stolen life. 1972, you told the neighbors I'm having episodes again. You told them I'm dangerous. Is that why you won't let me come to his birthday party? I'm not crazy, Margaret. I'm just a mother who misses her child. 1978, Bobby won the spelling bee. I saw it in the paper. You were quoted saying he gets his intelligence from the judge, does he? Or does he get it from the man you forbade me from marrying? I put the letters down. I stood up and paced the small room, my boots echoing on the hardwood. This wasn't just a secret, it was a rewriting of reality. Grandmother Margaret wasn't the savior who took pity on her unstable sister. She was the architect of her destruction. She had taken Clara's child, my father, and then systematically dismantled Clara's sanity to ensure she could never claim him back. She had painted Clara as unwell so that if Clara ever spoke the truth, no one would believe her. And it had worked. It had worked perfectly for 55 years. Suddenly, the sound of gravel crunching in the driveway shattered my focus. Headlights swept across the steady wall. I froze. I looked out the window and saw my father's silver sedan pulling up. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my veins. I couldn't face him. Not right now. Not with the truth burning a hole in my desk. I scrambled to pack the letters back into the cigar box. My fingers were clumsy. I shoved the box deep into my canvas tote bag and threw a pile of old National Geographic magazines on top of it. I locked the roll-top desk just as the front door creaked open. Sophie? Dad's voice boomed through the hallway. You still here, kiddo? I took a deep breath, forcing my face into a mask of boredom. In the study, Dad. He walked in, shaking rain off his umbrella. He looked tired but cheerful, the face of a man who believed his life was simple and honest. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the shelves I had spent hours dusting. Making progress, I see, he said, nodding. Although, honestly, you don't need to be so careful. Most of this is just junk. Clara was a pack rat. The words hit me like a physical blow. Junk. It's not junk, Dad, I said, my voice sounding tight. She has some beautiful things. Sketchbooks, journals. He laughed, a dismissive, heavy sound. Journals of a mad woman, Soph. Don't waste your time reading them. It's all nonsense. Mom said Clara used to write letters to imaginary people. Just toss it. I gripped the strap of my bag until my knuckles turned white. Is that what Grandma told you? That she imagined things? It's not what she told me, it's what we saw, he said, leaning against the doorframe. She was always confused, sad. Mom tried to help her, but you know, chemical imbalances. It's genetic. Unfortunately, he tapped his temple. I looked at him, my father, with his kind eyes and his cowlick. The one Clara had written about in 1970. He didn't know. He truly, genuinely didn't know. He believed he was the son of Margaret and the judge. He believed the woman in this cottage was just a tragic footnote in his successful life. Did she ever try to talk to you? I asked quietly, Clara? Sometimes, he shrugged. When I was a kid, she'd stare at me. It was creepy, to be honest. Mom told me to stay away from the fence. Said Clara might snap. You saw me standing by the fence, and you pulled him away. You looked at me like I was a monster. Tears pricked my eyes. I had to look away. I'm almost done, Dad. I'm just taking this bag of books. I'll finish the kitchen tomorrow. Sure, he said, checking his watch. Don't work too late. Mom wants us over for dinner on Sunday. She's making her roast. "I'll be there," I lied. I walked past him, my bag heavy on my shoulder. The weight of the box felt like lead. I drove home in silence. The rain hammered the roof of my car. I carried the box into my apartment, locked the door, and poured myself a glass of wine that I didn't drink. I sat on my floor and dumped the letters out again. I needed more than words. Words could be dismissed. Words could be called delusions. If I was going to bring down the matriarch of the Bennett family, I needed proof. I dug to the very bottom of the box. Under the stacks of letters, taped to the bottom cardboard, was a small, flat envelope. It was sealed with wax. I broke the seal. Inside was a single photograph in a folded document. The photograph was black and white. It showed a young woman in a hospital bed, looking exhausted but radiant. She was holding a newborn baby. Standing next to her, looking terrified and young, was Clara. But she wasn't visiting. She was wearing the hospital gown. And the document was a birth certificate. Certificate of live birth. Date, September 14, 1968. Mother, Clara Elizabeth Bennett. Father, unknown. Child's name, Robert Bennett. It was the original. The one that hadn't been filed. I stared at the paper. My grandmother hadn't just adopted him. She had stolen him. She had taken the baby, falsified the records, and then spent 50 years gaslighting the biological mother into an early grave. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me. Caller ID, Grandmother Margaret. I stared at the screen, the glowing name lighting up the dark room. The woman who baked pies. The woman who wore pond sweaters. The woman who stole a child. I didn't answer. I picked up the birth certificate, walked to my scanner, and made 5 copies. Then I answered. "Hello, grandmother," I said. My voice was calm. Dangerously calm. "Sophie, dear," her crisp, polished voice came through the line. "Your father tells me you brought a bag of books home from the cottage. You know, you really shouldn't clutter your apartment with Clara's old things. It's bad energy, is it?" I asked. I found it quite enlightening. There was a pause. A sharp, icy silence on the other end. "What did you find, Sophie?" "Just some old papers," I said. "History." "Bring them to me," she ordered. The sweetness was gone. The steel was back. "Tomorrow morning. Before you go to work. I want to see what you took." "I'll see you tomorrow," I said. I hung up. I wasn't going to bring her the papers. I was going to bring her down. But first, I needed to show the one person who mattered. I texted my father. "Dad, I need you to come to my apartment alone now." My father arrived 20 minutes later. He was still wearing his raincoat, dripping water onto my hallway rug, looking more annoyed than concerned. "Sophie, it is 9 o'clock at night," he said, checking his watch as he stepped into my living room. I was halfway through the news. This better be a real emergency, not just you getting spooked by some old ghost stories in that cottage. I didn't stand up. I sat at my small dining table, the single lamp casting a pool of yellow light over the papers spread out before me. The birth certificate. The photograph. The stacks of letters tied in blue ribbon. "Sit down, Dad," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow, like I was speaking from underwater. He sighed, shaking his head. "Honey, if this is about the furniture donation, we can handle it." "It's not about the furniture, sit down." The sharpness in my tone stopped him. He looked at me, really looked at me, and saw the fact that I had been crying. He saw the half-empty glass of wine. He saw the way my hands were pressed flat against the table to stop them from shaking. He pulled out a chair and sat. "Okay. I'm sitting. What is it?" I slid the photograph across the table first. "Face down." "You told me that Clara was sick," I said. "You told me she was delusional. You told me she made things up." "She did," he said gently, his voice softening. "Sophie, she was a troubled woman. We loved her, but she wasn't, right?" "Turn over the photo," he hesitated, his brow furrowing. Then, with a sigh of patience, he flipped the photo over. I watched his face. I watched the polite confusion fade, replaced by a squint of recognition. He picked it up, bringing it closer to the light. That's Clara," he said. "She looks so young here. And that's a baby? Look at the baby, Dad. Look at the hairline. Look at the eyes." He stared at the infant in the grainy black and white image. He laughed nervously. "Well, he looks a bit like me, actually." "The cowlick." "It is you," I said. The silence that followed was heavy, thick enough to choke on. The rain lashed against the window pane, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness inside. "Don't be ridiculous," he said, tossing the photo back onto the table. "That's impossible. Clara never had children. She was a spinster. Mom took care of her. Read this." I slid the birth certificate across the wood, the original one. The one with the seal that hadn't seen the light of day in 5 decades. He picked it up. He read it. I saw his eyes scan the lines. "Mother, Clara Elizabeth Bennett. Father, unknown. Child, Robert Bennett." He went very still. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "It was in her desk, hidden under the false bottom of a cigar box. Along with these." I pushed the stack of letters toward him. Hundreds of them, Dad. Letters she wrote to her sister. Letters begging to see you. Letters asking why she wasn't allowed to come to your birthday parties. Letters asking why Margaret told everyone she was crazy when all she wanted was to hold her son. No, he said. He stood up, the chair scraping violently against the floor. No, this is a forgery. It's part of her sickness. She forged a birth certificate because she was obsessed with me. Mom told me she was obsessed. She didn't forge the photo, Dad. And she didn't forge the dates. I stood up too, facing him. Think about it. Why were you never allowed to be alone with her? Why did Grandma Margaret control her finances? Why did she threaten to cut Clara off if she didn't sign the papers? Stop it, he shouted. It was the first time my father had ever raised his voice at me. My mother is a saint. She raised me. She gave me everything. She stole you, I shouted back. She took you because she wanted a perfect family and Clara was unmarried and vulnerable. She didn't save Clara, she blackmailed her. She spent 50 years convincing you that your own mother was a monster just so you wouldn't ask questions. He looked at me, his chest heaving. He looked like a cornered animal. He looked at the letters on the table, the physical weight of a truth he couldn't outrun. Slowly, his hand reached out. He picked up one of the letters. The paper crinkled in his grip. He read it. September 15th, 1974. Happy 6th birthday, my little Bobby. I made a cake today, a chocolate one. Just in case you came by, I sat on the porch until the sun went down. I know Margaret won't bring you. She says I confuse you. She says I'm bad for you, but I'm your mother. How can a mother be bad for her own heart? My father made a sound I will never forget. It was a low, guttural sob that seemed to tear its way out of his throat. He dropped the letter. He collapsed back into the chair, burying his face in his hands. She made a cake, he whispered. I remember that birthday. I asked Mom if we could invite Aunt Clara. She told me Clara hated birthdays. She told me Clara didn't want to see me. She wanted to see you every day, I said softly. Walking around the table to put a hand on his shoulder, he was shaking. She watched you from the window for 50 years, Dad. She signed away her rights because Margaret promised she could still be your aunt, and then Margaret broke the promise. He looked up at me. His eyes were red, rimmed with a pain so raw it was hard to look at. The denial was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was the devastation of a man realizing his entire history was a fabrication. She died alone, he choked out. My mother. She died alone in that house thinking I didn't love her. She knew you didn't know, I said. But we know now. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He took a deep breath. The expression on his face changed. The grief hardened into something else. Something cold. Something dangerous. He looked at the birth certificate again. Then he looked at the phone on the table. You said Mom. You said Margaret called you? She wants the papers, I said. She knows I found something. She told me to bring them to her tomorrow morning. My father stood up. He buttoned his raincoat. He picked up the box of letters. He picked up the birth certificate and the photo. His hands were steady now. We're not waiting until morning, he said, Dad. He walked to the door, opening it to the pouring rain and the dark night. He turned back to look at me and his eyes were like flint. Get your keys, Sophie, he said. We're going to my mother's house. I have some questions about my childhood. The drive to Grandmother Margaret's house was the longest 20 minutes of my life. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, slashing against the windshield as if trying to wash the world clean. My father didn't speak. He drove with a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, but I knew he wasn't seeing the asphalt. He was seeing 50 years of lies playing out in his head like a corrupted film reel. He was rewriting every memory, every time Clara waved from her porch, every time Margaret pulled him away, every time he was told that his aunt was dangerous. We pulled up to the house, the sprawling, pristine colonial on the hill that had always been the symbol of the Bennett family's success. It looked like a fortress tonight. The lights were on in the formal living room. She was awake. Dad turned off the engine. He took a breath that sounded like a shudder. Ready? I asked softly. No, he said. But let's go. We walked up the brick path in the rain. Dad didn't bother with the umbrella. He unlocked the front door with his key, the key to the house he thought was his birthright. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and expensive potpourri. It was warm, silent, and suffocatingly perfect. Margaret, Dad called out. He didn't call her Mom. She appeared from the living room wearing a silk dressing gown, looking impeccable even at 10 o'clock at night. She held a book in her hand, her finger marking the page. She looked at me, then at Dad, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in our wet clothes and the wild look in my father's eyes. Robert, she said, her voice smooth and controlled. Sophie? What on earth are you doing here at this hour? You're dripping on the Persian rug. Dad didn't move. He didn't apologize. He walked past her into the living room and threw the cigar box onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the surface and knocking over a crystal coaster. Margaret stared at the box. Her expression didn't change, but her posture stiffened. She closed her book slowly. "I see Sophie has been digging," she said coldly. "I told you, Robert. That woman was a hoarder. Her things are toxic." "Stop," Dad said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. "Stop lying." He pulled the birth certificate from his pocket. He unfolded it, his hands shaking, and held it up. "Who is this?" he asked. "Who is Clara Elizabeth Bennett?" Margaret sighed. She walked over to the fireplace and adjusted a figurine on the mantel, turning her back to him. "She was my sister." "You know that. She is my mother," Dad said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Margaret turned around. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look remorseful. She looked annoyed. She looked like a teacher dealing with a slow student. "She was your biological vessel, Robert," she said sharply. "That is all. She was unfit. She was emotional. She was weak. Do you think she could have raised you in that drafty cottage with no husband, with her moods?" "She wasn't sick," I interjected, stepping forward. "I read the letters. Grandma, she wasn't sick. She was grieving. You made her sick by keeping her son away from her." Margaret's eyes snapped to me. "You know nothing, foolish girl. I saved him. I took a child who would have been raised in poverty and shame, and I gave him a father who was a judge. I gave him the best schools. I gave him a future. I did what had to be done to protect this family's reputation." "You stole me," Dad whispered. "You didn't adopt me. You stole me. I rescued you." She finally raised her voice, her composure cracking. "Clara was a mess. She was pregnant at 22 by a man who vanished. She was going to ruin her life and yours. I stepped in. I handled it. I gave you my name. I gave you my life. And this is how you thank me? By digging up the scribblings of a bitter, dead woman?" "She wasn't bitter," Dad said, his voice breaking. "She was heartbroken. She made me a cake. Margaret, every year. She made me a chocolate cake and sat on her porch waiting for a son you told me was too good to see her. Because you were too good for her." Margaret snapped. "Look at you, Robert. You're successful. You're respected. You think you would have been any of that if you were raised by Clara?" "She was soft. The world eats soft people." "She loved me," Dad said. "And you just wanted an accessory. You wanted a son to complete your perfect picture." "I loved you enough to do what was necessary," Margaret hissed. "I bore the burden of her illness. I paid her bills. I kept her secret. You bought her silence," I said. "You threatened her." Margaret laughed, a cruel, dry sound. "It's called leverage, Sophie, and look at the result, a perfect family until you decided to ruin it." Dad looked at the woman he had worshipped for 55 years. He looked at the elegant furniture, the portraits on the wall, the lies built on top of lies. "It's over," he said quietly. "Don't be dramatic," Margaret scoffed, smoothing her silk robe. "You're upset. You're in shock. Go home. Sleep on it. We will discuss this rationally in the morning. You are a Bennett, Robert. We do not air our dirty laundry." "I'm not a Bennett," Dad said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his house key, the key to the home he grew up in. "And neither are you. You're a kidnapper." He dropped the key on the floor. It clattered against the wood. "We're leaving," Dad said to me. "And tomorrow, I'm contacting a lawyer. Clara's estate isn't closed. And neither is this. If you walk out that door," Margaret warned, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "you destroy everything. You destroy my reputation. Your father's legacy. You will be the son of a spinster. You will humiliate us." Dad stopped at the door. He turned back, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the rain. "I'd rather be the son of a spinster who loved me," he said, "than the son of a monster who owned me." We walked out into the rain. Margaret stood in the doorway, screaming his name, but he didn't look back. The door slammed shut behind us, sealing the tomb of the living. My great-aunt's unsent letters revealed a betrayal that rocked our family apart. 5 of 5 word count. 800 words. The days following the confrontation were a blur of rain, lawyers, and a silence that felt heavier than the storm that had broken over us. My father didn't go back to his apartment. He stayed on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, reading the letters. He read them chronologically, from 1968 to 2023. He read about his first steps, which Clara had watched through binoculars. He read about his high school graduation, which she had attended by standing in the back of the football stadium, hidden in the crowd. He spent 3 days weeping for a woman he had been taught to pity, realizing she was the only person who had ever truly loved him without condition. We didn't wait for Margaret to come to us. We went to the law. We hired a family attorney, a shark named Mr. Henderson, who took one look at the original birth certificate and the forged adoption papers and went to work. In 1968, money could buy silence. But in 2024, DNA didn't lie. The test results came back a week later, 99.9% match, Clara Bennett was Robert Bennett's biological mother. Margaret was his aunt. The legal fallout was quiet but devastating. The statute of limitations had passed for kidnapping. But the court of public opinion has no expiration date. News travels fast in small towns, especially when it involves the perfect family. We didn't have to sell the story. The truth has a weight of its own. When the corrected death certificate was filed, listing Clara as mother, the Whisper Network did the rest. Margaret, the woman who had spent 50 years curating her image as the benevolent matriarch, found herself alone. The country club lunches stopped. The charity boards asked for her resignation. The neighbors who had once nodded sympathetically at her stories about crazy Clara now crossed the street to avoid her. She had feared scandal more than anything else in the world. And in her desperate attempt to avoid it, she had created a tragedy that swallowed her whole. She sat in that big, empty house on the hill, surrounded by her expensive furniture and her hollow legacy. We never spoke to her again. My father simply excised her from his life like a tumor. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Dad and I stood in the cemetery. Clara's grave had been a simple, flat marker that Margaret had paid for bare minimum. Tucked in the back corner near the tree line, it was overgrown with weeds when we first visited. But today, it was different. My father had commissioned a new headstone. It was beautiful rose granite, polished to a shine. Standing tall and proud against the turning leaves, he knelt in the dirt, ignoring the damp earth soaking into his jeans, and ran his hand over the engraving. Clara Elizabeth Bennett, 1946-2023. Beloved mother, she loved from the shadows, but her light never faded. I wish I had known, Dad whispered, his voice thick. I wish I could have just had one conversation, just one. She knew you, I said, crouching beside him. She knew everything about you, Dad. In a way, she knew you better than Margaret ever did. She didn't need you to be a judge or a doctor, she just needed you to be Bobby. He nodded, wiping his eyes. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, laminated recipe card. He had found it in the kitchen drawer at the cottage. Bobby's birthday cake. Double chocolate, extra fudge. I'm going to make it, he said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. For my birthday next week, I'm going to make her cake. We spent the rest of the year turning Clara's cottage into a home. Dad didn't sell it, he moved in. He said he felt closer to her there, surrounded by her books and the smell of lavender. He framed her charcoal sketches and hung them in the hallway. He cleared the ivy from the windows, so the light could finally come in. The Bennett family as we knew it was gone. The reunions, the pretenses, the pressure to be perfect had all dissolved, and in its place, we built something real. I learned that family isn't about bloodlines or birth certificates. And it certainly isn't about reputation. Family is about who shows up. It's about who stands in the rain to catch a glimpse of you. It's about the love that survives even when it's forced into silence. Margaret died 2 years later. She died in her sleep, alone in her fortress. Her funeral was attended by 5 people. There were no tears, just the closing of a book that should have ended a long time ago. But every year, on September 15th, my father bakes a double chocolate cake. We sit on the porch of the cottage, watching the sun go down, eating the cake that Clara never got to serve him. And sometimes, when the wind blows through the wind chimes she hung in the garden, I see my father look out toward the fence line, and he doesn't look sad anymore. He looks like a son who finally found his way home.